If you don't have crystal clear product market fit, if you haven't identified your core competencies that you do better than any one of your competitors, have identified your target audience, that part of the market that values what you do best better than anybody else, that you can then package up into saying, here's who we are, here's what we do best, here's why we exist, and here's where we delight our customer segment better than anybody else in the world. Until you get there, leave scale and 10-year growth out of your mind right now. Focus on that first.
And good day, everybody. Hi, I'm Walter. I'm the Dutch mentor, and welcome back to the S.M.A.R.T podcast, where S stands for self-care, M for mindful growth, A for adaptive learning, R for rhythmic operations, T for thriving community, and P, of course, for our performance indicators. I'm really happy to have Aaron with me today as an expert in building leadership teams. This talk today will fit into the category of rhythmic operations. Again, fast-paced, key takeaways, and I promise you will be action-filled, but more importantly, you will be able to have tangible things that you can put into play today to accelerate and build a better team for the future. Aaron, thank you very much for joining me today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, Walter, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this conversation. And yeah, for me, leadership really happened at a much earlier point in my career than I ever would have anticipated. 23 years old, getting thrown into kind of a battlefield promotion here and there, and kind of being tapped to run a $100 million division at a pretty early age. It was a very sink or swim moment. Luckily, I was a fairly good swimmer, so eventually used that as kind of the launching pad that led me to launching and running $1 billion organization, publicly traded, by the time that I was 30. And now I found myself on the opposite side of the table, that as a career executive that I found myself on. Um, Look, that journey is nothing more than just me making a large series of mistakes, learning from them, and really applying those learnings to now be able to help leaders and organizations learn from the lessons that I had to learn from without having to acquire the same scars.
Listen, being vulnerable is probably the key to success, and those who stick their hands in the sand and either fail to recognize any failures or deny them will stunt their growth as well. So having said that, going from zero to $1 billion doesn't happen by chance.
Right.
And so tell us a little bit about some of your successes as well as failures, or failures that led to successes, that really the audience can grasp onto and try to relate to, and what actions did you take to recover from that?
Yeah, I would say on the success side, it's, there's a lot of, let's just say, a lot of fluff out there around fads, frameworks, how to scale, how to do this. But really, once all the smoke clears, what I learned and was, very, uh, very lucky to have the opportunity to learn within an organization at an early age, that execution is everything. Ideas are great, strategies are great, but at some point, there has to be a bias for action to execute. And then beyond execution is, can the organization do two things: continuously improve and stay accountable? And so, regardless of industry, regardless of sector, regardless of macroeconomic environment, can you execute? Can you continuously improve? And can you stay accountable to follow through on the commitments that you make as a leadership team, as an organization, to keep making that progress? And then for me, on the other side of that coin, something that, you know, when I received a 360-degree feedback assessment that really jumped off the page and, hit me in the face like a ton of bricks, was there's a lot of great that comes from being a leader and being in a leadership role at an early age. But one of the weaknesses that I would say that I experienced was around people leadership. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here with you and your audience. Look, we don't come out of college knowing how to lead teams and lead complex individuals and personalities. So that was a big learning curve for me. And that showed up on a 360-degree feedback. And I remember that being a very pivotal a moment in my career, where that's where I decided this is a weakness that I have to develop into a strength. And that eventually, took me from interest to passion to obsession which now has me doing what I do today with helping leaders lead organizations and simply get better at getting better.
Yeah, that's great. I think that it's people, 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 communication, communication, communication. And as a younger person, a young version of myself too, I was more inward looking than outward looking. And often,
Mm,
as I say, I like to be on the leading edge of the wing. The problem is you cannot be too far ahead because then you will be left behind. And the way to find that out is doing a reflective survey or a 360, and people will teach you really quickly. It's not about your reality, but it's really the perception of you that matters at the end of the day, right? And the
that's
sooner
right.
leaders can recognize that by being vulnerable and asking these questions with sincerity, the quicker they can find recovery. But I want to go back one step. So in operational rhythm, as I call this, having the right people in the right roles, being unified, having meaningful measures, and be accountable. And I want to go back to the word accountability.
Mm,
It is the single most difficult thing for people to do, especially in today where people are, very satisfied with the 24-hour news cycle, rapid iteration, but no follow-up.
yeah.
Accountability leads to 70, 80% failures or lack or failure to even come close to the intended goal itself. So dive a little deeper into the accountability question and how did you overcome that? And what would you suggest people do to become more accountable?
Yeah, for me, it was look, it's easy for us to sit here and talk about this in a very safe environment. And of course, it's fairly obvious that, yeah, to be a successful organization, you've got to execute well and you got to stay accountable, right? But when you're in the heat of battle, accountability can start to get a little foggy. And so for me, what really helped was I found that accountability is what showed up at the bottom of a waterfall, so to speak. And so if we follow that waterfall back up, what are all the different inputs that then lead to the outputs and outcomes of accountability to happen? First and foremost, at the top of that waterfall, that I continue to notice year after year after year was priority management, or on the flip side of that, priority mismanagement. So once for a leadership team that priorities become clear, everything else gets easier. I like to kind of make the statement to the CEOs that I work with. Imagine I walk into your next leadership team meeting. I walk in the room, nobody knows that I'm going to be there, and I secretly go around the room and ask everyone in attendance the same two questions. What are the top two or three priorities for the business, and why are these the priorities right now?
Mhm.
What would happen? 9 out of 10 times, they say I'm going to get a variety of different answers around the room. So, for accountability to happen in terms of your outcome, this is where it starts. Our priorities clear. The next phase of that waterfall comes down to the big C word that you just mentioned, communication. If it's just the leaders in that room that know what the priorities are and the rest of the organization, 100, 200, 500 people don't know, how can you then expect accountability?
Yep.
And then third, once priorities are set, once they've been clearly communicated and articulated, can you continue to drive and harness organizational focus behind those things that you've made the priorities? Those are the key dependencies for accountability to happen. If one of those things are missing, you as a leader or a CEO can sit around saying that you want to hold people accountable. But if people don't know what the priorities are, it hasn't been clearly communicated over and over again, and their focus isn't going into the right areas, and they know what success looks like, how on earth are you going to be able to hold teams accountable? Or said differently, you're holding the teams accountable to what? There's too much misinformation, priorities are unclear, and people don't know where to focus. So accountability at that point in time is going to be wildly elusive.
So, and again, that's precisely the reason, right? Is that why people don't succeed or they limit their success. So, with that said, accountability, and sometimes people say, the thing is that accountability is hitting people with a hammer.
Mhm.
My philosophy really is it needs to be soft as possible and as firm as it needs to be. Love and tough love. So, talk a little bit about when a leader is not accountable. What is the right way to address that, or subordinate for that matter?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, if we just zoom out and just think about humans for a second, I don't think, especially in a community, team, or organizational environment, most times, not to say 100% of the time, there's always exceptions, but most team members don't want to let you, the boss or the leader, down, right? No one wants to just not be accountable to things that they're on the hook for. There's always an underlying reason. Do they not know how to do said thing they're being accountable to? Are they unclear on what the outcome needs to be from the thing you're holding them accountable to? Do they not have the proper context around why this matters in the grand scheme of kind of organizational initiatives? And so I think the mistake that I see a lot of leaders make is overcorrecting, right? They haven't held them accountable. Now they're kind of coming in full force and, really, really leading with an iron fist here. When if you just peel the layers of the onion back, I think the most skilled and effective leaders can pinpoint why there are
Hmm.
accountability issues. And instead of blaming the employee, first take a space of saying, what could I have done differently as the leader? What could I have done better? Did I set the proper priorities? Did I clearly communicate them? Does the employee know exactly why we're doing this with the right context and what success looks like and by when we expect to deliver these results? And then did I initiate the proper follow through? And so I would start first with an introspective view of what could I have done differently? Because most times employees aren't just wanting to, go against you and not be accountable to the things just for the, out of spite, so to speak.
Hmm.
And so I would go a layer deeper and really start to understand, and first starting with yourself as the leader, what could I have done differently? And usually with communication, context, and clarity, you're usually able to easily overcome some of the gaps in accountability.
Yeah. I call it leading with the why and not control, right? It is like get people to buy into what it is you need rather than just telling people what to do. The purpose, passion, connection really makes a world of difference at that time. So I
That's
want
right.
to change the direction of the conversation for a few minutes
Sure.
as we start wrapping up, because again, it is about getting to the point. What is it that you say a startup entrepreneur? Now, I don't care if it's in a small department or
Mhm.
your own startup. What is it that they should be doing right out of the gate, or they to be able to set up that team that can grow to that $1 billion business?
Yeah, I think I work with a lot of startups, and one of the cardinal sins that I hear a lot of startups kind of bring to me is looking to scale too early. And let me double click on that and around what that means is, you know, too many founders, early stage companies, startups, they're looking for the scale 5 and 10 years down the road. And I think there's a time and place for that. But if you don't have crystal clear product market fit, if you haven't identified your core competencies that you do better than any one of your competitors, have identified your target audience, that part of the market that values what you do best better than anybody else, that you can then package up into saying, here's who we are, here's what we do best, here's why we exist, and here's where we delight our customer segment better than anybody else in the world. Until you get there, leave scale and 10-year growth out of your mind right now. Focus on that first. And so I think it's hard for startup founders sometimes to be able to narrow the scope of focus. But focus for any organization is a superpower. If you're trying to be in everything to everybody, you'll never win. And so I think first and foremost is get clarity. Really make sure who you are core to, what your core service or product that you're bringing to market, and how exactly you solve a problem for this particular market that shows up in terms of enterprise value to them. Once you get clear on that, I think it's really driving that focus first, then and only then do you start to be able to scale from there. But I think it starts simple, start small, and really get crystal clear on how it is that you're going to separate yourself from the market.
Yeah, I love that. It is. I always say, listen, to build a house, you don't start at the roof.
That's
Right.
right.
We need to get to the soil. We need to have a really good plan, and then we need to build an infrastructure to be able to support that house. I see it often with these infrastructure, with these startup companies. There's wild enthusiasm and passion, some level of luck in order to get that seed money. And then they want to do is grow, 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 but they forget that if you don't have a strong foundation, all you're doing is building in a house of cards that is going to collapse at the first big,
Yeah.
turbulent moment.
That's that's right. And I've changed how I ask startup founders or early stage CEOs. Instead of saying, "Tell me about your business" or "What does your business do?" I now go straight to the point. I say, "Tell me what you're best in the world at and what customer segment benefits the most from that core competency." You can find out very quickly over the next 10 seconds with the response they give you back how focused that organization is, or are they still searching for that product market fit?
Yeah. And I think we can translate that if you are a departmental leader within an organization, you too need to be able to answer the exact question that Aaron just asked with laser focus and how do I measure my own performance? If you cannot articulate that, what are you doing? Right? So that's really
That's right.
right. So in the closing minutes, tell us a little bit about what it is, or where we can find you. What are your closing thoughts, and what are some actions that people can take today to establish that foundation, that focus that sets them up for long-term success?
Yeah. So easiest place to find me is going to be number one on LinkedIn. I'm very active there, always trying to share lessons I've learned along my journey that, as I mentioned earlier, is going to save others from acquiring the same scars. And then on a bit more around how I add value is going to be from my website, performancemindsetcoaching.co. And what you're going to find there is my philosophy on really helping businesses get better at getting better through an operating system approach. And just like I mentioned, I'm not here to solve every single problem a business has. My focus is helping any organization in any industry able to continuously increase effectiveness in those five areas we've talked about: prioritization, communication, focus, execution, and accountability. And I think the number one rule for leadership teams is to not let your level of effectiveness in those five areas be tossed up to randomness. Have a system driven approach across each one of those areas that can be the forcing mechanism that helps your organization continue to get better at getting better across those areas.
Excellent. And people need to remember you do not need to go at it alone. It's perfectly good to find yourself a coach or a mentor who can help you along that path, because trust me, it will save you grief, time, and money in the back end.
Well
In the
said.
show
Well,
notes, that's right. In the show note, we'll be able to find Aaron's information. Aaron, any last thoughts?
yeah, I think back to that scale message, right? Every business is looking to scale, but for the leaders and emerging leaders and aspiring leaders listening to this, the one thing, again, a lesson that I had to learn the hard way is that it's virtually impossible to scale a business over the long term if the leaders in that business are not scaling themselves. If you're not growing and developing and becoming more effective, it is a low probability that you will then create a scaling and growth situation for the organization you're in charge of running. They go hand in hand.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you very much for joining me on the show today. And again, you find the podcast on all the usual sources. And of course, always welcome comments, reach back out. And Aaron, thank you very much for your time today. Look forward to staying in touch with you. Much success in your business. And folks, make sure without action, you get no results.